Welcome to Post-Doom, regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. I'm Michael Dowd, your host, and in this conversation, recorded in early December 2019, I speak with a longtime friend and colleague, Rick Ingrasci. I've known Rick since the days when he had co-founded Interface, which is Boston's largest holistic health or holistic educational center. He also co-founded a number of other organizations, Physicians for Social Responsibility, for example. He's a psychiatrist. But he's also known for his work in the story field. He has a story dome, the Would-Be Story Dome project, and has been a parallel tracks with what Connie and I have been doing in terms of the universe story, the epic of evolution for many, many years. And Rick is one of those people who, with his wife, Peggy Taylor, able to hold the big picture, including all the scary stuff, and ultimately come from a place of generosity of soul and a place of compassionate action. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Rick, it is a delight to interact with you in this forum because we're both in Langley, Washington right now. Can you just give us a little bit of a bio, like help us get you and what you are known for and what you're particularly interested in or passionate or curious about these days?
Sure. Well, I'm from Western New York. I was born and raised in Niagara Falls, New York, Italian-American family. I went to Cornell University and studied philosophy of mind and was pre-med. I had lots of interesting psychedelic and consciousness-raising experiences in the 60s. And when I got to medical school, I wanted to do psychedelic psychiatry, actually, but Nixon started the war on drugs and slammed the door on that avenue. So my interest never wavered in terms of the role that consciousness plays in human transformation. And so my adult life became an education path. You know, I also have a master's in public health from the Harvard School of Public Health. My interest there was community medicine, community mental health. And as you'll see when I share a few stories, my entire professional life and adult life has been related to the role that community and individual transformation plays in evolution. So I'm kind of a big picture thinker and guy. I had some formative experiences early on. When I was about 12 years old, I became a professional jazz musician, played jazz accordion of all things. And the significance of that is that I had the opportunity as a young child to play and improvise and be creative in ways that made my life joyful and happy. So I've lived a pretty charmed life in that regard. After medical school and psychiatric residency in Boston, I began to start holistic medical clinics with colleagues and experiment with integrative and complementary approaches to healthcare. The work I did in terms of my own practice was around mind-body healing and life-threatening illness. So I worked quite a bit with cancer patients and the techniques that involve the role of the mind and the will to live in the healing process. Mm-hmm. Again, these are themes that when we talk about what we're going to focus on today, they're relevant because individual mortality and collective mortality essentially are parallel scalable processes. And,
yes, exactly.
So I learned a lot about death and dying, and about what it means to live in the face of the reality of dying, and it's been quite a ride. Well, I do, like you say, a listserv called Big Mind News, and it began the week after 9/11 when I realized the media spin on what had just gone down was going to go, neo-fascist, and it kind of has moved in the direction of the right wing. But the list really grew out of my entire learning and education process over the course of my life. I've always been interested in, big picture, holistic thinking. Marshall McLuhan and Bucky Fuller were mentors of mine, and I started a holistic education center in Boston called Interface that ran for 25 years and brought a lot of these new thinkers and ideas into the Boston area. My wife, Peggy Taylor, was editor and publisher of New Age Journal, which again brought us in touch with a lot of the leading edge thinkers of the day, the humanistic movement in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so as things unfolded, we were involved with starting Hollyhock Retreat Center up in British Columbia. Again, another setting where leading edge ideas and processes are explored. And after a while, you begin to realize, boy, there's really something to be said for people who take risks and think outside the box and try new ways. Given that I believe we're living in a moment where we have to create new stories and new ways of being that are a reflection of a living universe rather than, a mechanistic, dead, purposeless universe. My news list reflects multiple perspectives around a central theme, which is life is at the center of everything, and we need to find ways to be life affirming in not only the ideas we promulgate, but the ways we live.
Since you used the term a couple times, big mind news, to say something quick about that.
Well, big mind is a Buddhist concept for kind of the mystical state of union with all life and with the cosmos. I had an internet company in the late 90s called Big Mind Media, with a small group of people who were doing what looks suspiciously like where Facebook ended up. We were playing with computer conferencing and connectivity for individuals and groups. But I don't know, there's something that resonates with my way of looking at the world. The big mind gives you that expansive point of view and allows you to recognize that it's all connected. Everything is connected. Everything is alive.
Yes.
And, you and I, it's interesting, Michael, I've known you quite a few years. You are brilliant at languaging and, almost poetically coming up with ways of framing things that I think are really quite valuable. I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because I just listened to your latest sermon there in Bellevue, and, that's crisp. It's wonderful.
Truly.
And clearly, Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, the universe story, big history, that's what I resonate with also on the deepest philosophical and spiritual levels. The impact of Thomas's work on my life. You're aware of the fact that later on it manifested in the Story Dome project. Seattle World.
Say more about that. I was going to ask you about that, but now's a good time, because you actually also introduced me to David McConville in your living room.
Yes.
As well as David White, the poet, at another time. And you're one of the most networked people that I know. But say something about the Dome project.
Well, David McConville was centered to that. His company, Illuminati, had created these inflatable, portable planetariums that you could tell stories in, and immersive media storytelling, in other words, really powerful stuff. And I had met David a few years prior to 2011, and he had brought a dome, a geodome they're called, to the Hollyhock Summer Gathering, a leadership conference that I've been doing for 34 years up at Hollyhock. And again, it was like Thomas Berry's storytelling come alive, the ability to paint the picture of life from the beginning all the way to now, and looking into the future. Where does this kind of systemic thinking go, Anyway, I got so inspired by that when I was invited by a friend at the Seattle Center to create an exhibit for the 50th anniversary celebration of the Seattle World's Fair, I said, well, why don't we get one of these domes, create a film that's about a half hour long, and just show it to everybody who's interested, as an exhibit. And so we did. We bought a dome. We wrote a script, and David McConville was very helpful with that. Brought some media artists together. some incredible digital atlas of the universe software. Mm-hmm. And we created a half-hour film called Earth Portal, a guided tour of the universe and our place in it.
Yes.
And quite frankly, I was interested, and there were lots of potential applications of this kind of storytelling, but I had the question, does it shift a person's worldview to experience, even briefly, a sense of connection to the universe that's profound?
Yes.
And the answer, after a year, we were there for 12 months at the Seattle Center, running these shows and doing some other things with it as well. But the answer is yes. The universe story makes a difference in people's awareness, consciousness, worldview. And, you know, again, this is confirmation of what I already believed in a sense, but it's nice to have some empirical evidence and to see people's lives and faces light up from a new story like this.
Yes. Well, helping us shift out of anthropocentrism, human-centeredness, to a larger life-centeredness in time and space, and
absolutely,
and our role in that. So, wow.
Yeah, I consider that a required course at this point. You know, that shift from, I call it egocentrism to ecocentrism, but
yes.
Same idea. You know, that our worldview, this kind of Newtonian dualistic worldview, has brought us to the brink of destruction. And salvation is clearly in the holistic consciousness. You know, once you wake up to that, everything starts to change. And ultimately, what has to change is the way we live.
Rick, coming to the questions that I've been inviting all my guests in the series to respond to if they want to. The first one is simply related to language. What language do you find yourself using? Do you find post-doom helpful at all? Like what ways of speaking about to yourself and to others do you find most useful or most accurate at these times?
Yeah, I do find post-doom interesting and helpful. I haven't cozied up to it as something that, you know, becomes part of my vernacular yet, because when you use it, you also define it, you know, frame it in a way that makes it useful. That's why I say you're very creative with language. For me, you know, in the early days, I mean, I must say it was the limits to growth study in the early 70s that woke me up. I was enough by that time of a general systems theorist and interested in holistic thinking to know that, okay, if you take a systemic view of life, then clearly we are headed toward, again, my phrase, overshoot and die off.
Yes, exactly.
I know you like overshoot. I always include the die off part because.
Yes, exactly. No, that's good. That's good. Well, it's interesting because William Catton's second book after Overshoot, which, as you know, I consider the most important book I've ever read, was titled Bottleneck, and that's the die-off part.
So yeah, I find lots of I think we should move away from global warming as a concept because it's too milquetoast. It's too middle of the road. Climate change, climate catastrophe, climate crisis, things that point to the urgency of our moment. I mean, what really does shock me is how lackadaisical and how strong the what you call functional denial is at this point. That we're willing. I don't know about you, but every day when I look at my lifestyle and I realize I'm embedded in a system that's destroying life on planet Earth and creating the potential for human extinction, you know, we're part of the problem. I mean, we are consumers beyond belief of energy and information. You know, it's just, it's got to be acknowledged. Now, the problem is that once you see that you're embedded in a system that's destroying the planet and that you're a part of the problem, you still have to ask the question, how then shall we live?
Exactly.
And I must say, if you ask me to answer that question, I can't give you a solid answer at this point because, you know.
Well, you know, it's exactly that question. It's exactly not only that question, but that question following the awareness that we are embedded in systems that are anti-future, and we're the inheritors of political, governmental, economic, religious systems that have been anthropocentric and anti-future for so many generations that we can't in any easy or meaningful way. It's certainly not enough of us can do it that it's going to matter to step outside the system. I mean, Thomas Berry himself used to famously say, I drove a car here to tell you how bad cars are. You know, so it was really Jim Bendel's deep adaptation paper, and then his subsequent writings since then, Catherine Ingram's Facing Extinction long form essay.
Very powerful.
Yeah, Paul Chafurka, his Approaching the Limits blog, and some of the amazing things he wrote between 2008 and 2013, which is still some of the most inspiring things that I refer everybody to his Stages of Awakening, as well as his Finding the Gift essay, which is on the other side of the Kubler-Ross Stages of Grief. After acceptance, there can be Finding the Gift. And then, so in addition to Jem Bendel, Catherine Ingram, Paul Chafurka, of course, Dar Jamel and Barbara Cecil's amazing truth outposts on how then shall we live? And those were the main
series.
Yeah, and those were the main. Those four people, more than anyone else, were, well, five people were the main sort of catalyst for this entire post-doom series. Because it seems to me every season there's going to be several more million people that will move through some form of denial or functional denial and be ready for this kind of a conversation that weren't ready last season. And I wanted to have a body of conversations where people can watch some of these amazing conversations that Connie edits, the ones she wants to edit, but they'll all be available in audio. And then people can find some of these people to be teachers and mentors and people that they can learn from and be inspired by. And that's why I'm doing it.
Well, you know, deep bow of gratitude to you and Connie for providing a real service in this moment. This is the zeitgeist of awakening. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of pain and suffering around waking up to the fact that so much is going to be lost or is already being lost. You know, it's really important that we ask that question: how can I serve, at what level, at what scale, in the face of this kind of grief and suffering? Because, as you know, my philosophy is, if you want to create a new culture, which is what I think we're trying to do, throw a better party. Well, that doesn't mean superficially just get drunk and you know, be all Dionysian. It means look for the joy in serving life now, in this moment.
Yes.
At whatever scale fits your skills. Wonderful. Because these stories need to be told. They need to be told in terms of maximum cultural diffusion in lots of different ways. And you know, you're speaking the contemporaneous, timely language of multimedia. You know, the internet and digital technologies have made global access a reality. I must say, my head is still spinning from the rapid evolution of digital technology in the past 25, 30 years. Just the opportunity is there, you know, as well as the dark side, as you know. But let's focus on the light.
The heart of this series is various thought leaders and artists and activists and what have you sharing their journey, their story. Please.
Sure. Well, give you the short form. And
doesn't have to be too short.
Well, no, but the 12 years old turned out to be one of those awakening ages for me. As I said, I became a professional jazz musician at age 12, joined the union and started to play locally. And that brought me great joy, and also just the experience of taking the risk of improvising music in a community with a group of people. The other thing that happened is that I read the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and for a 12-year-old to kind of get that the Buddha walked away from a pretty sweet lifestyle and sought enlightenment because he recognized that something else was driving human suffering than poverty. And it led me to just be interested. That's how I got into philosophy and theology. It just struck me that, boy, these deep questions are really where the sweet spot is if you're looking for human happiness and equanimity. the Buddha seems to be on the right path.
Right.
So when I got to college, I went to Cornell for 4 years. It was at the height of the Vietnam War between 65 and 69. And, I was an anti-war activist. I was very interested in alternative ways of being. The psychedelic movement had its impact on me. I had some direct experiences of mystical union that, I would say were formative in terms of my understanding of the nature of reality.
Sure.
But I was an idealist, by the time I got to medical school and got involved with holistic medicine, I really thought the revolution was well at hand, and that by the end of the 70s, where we were idealistically dreaming things could or should go, we'd get there. And of course, that was the naivete of youth. It hasn't worked out quite that quickly or quite as well as any of us had hoped. But I not only started practicing medicine, in the early 70s, but that's what we started Interface, this holistic education center, simultaneously in 1974. And that's where I was able to bring great teachers and people that I was interested in studying with to Boston to do public presentations. We started with Buckminster Fuller, as I mentioned, and it was just an inspiration to work with Bucky for 7 years. And really, he was techno-utopian in style, but he was also just a beautiful human being who really cared about creating a world that worked for all. Yes. And he called it the world game back then. And so when the Limits to Growth came out, I was in Boston, and they were at MIT. I realized I've got to really take an in-depth look at the ecological and environmental movements. They know something that's really critical to our survival, and it really needs to be taught. People need to wake up. And it always amazes me. You keep thinking it's going to happen overnight, but here we are, 35 years later, and there's a ways to go. But that's essentially, I spent my entire adult life, both at Interface for 20 years and so before I moved, we moved out to the West Coast in 1991 to Whidbey Island. Having started Hollyhock in 1982 and having my family living in Seattle, I had lots of interesting reasons to relocate. And I don't know, you can say whatever you want about Whidbey. This is an amazing conscious community of people on the south end of this island, and
I wholeheartedly agree. It's one of our favorite places in all of North America.
Yeah, it's a blessing to live here.
Yes.
So in the early 80s, we started Interface, as I said, or not Interface, Hollyhock in 82. By 1986, Peggy, my wife, and I, and a group of friends wanted to start to play with conference process. We wanted to really invent something that was more playful and engaging. We wanted to create a better party as a conference. And so we started something called the Hollyhock Invitational Conference, which we changed the name to Hollyhock Summer Gathering. But I've been doing that for 34 years now at Hollyhock, and we also do a winter gathering here at the Whidbey Institute called the Whidbey Winter Gathering. That's become, from a creative point of view, social creativity, social invention, kind of our laboratory, a place where we keep the structure and the rules to a minimum and allow for maximum creativity based on the fact that you're in a safe, supportive, loving field of energy. And it's amazing what happens when people feel safe and supported in community. I mention that over and over again simply because it is, I keep coming back to whatever the problem is, community is the answer.
Yes.
That the situation we face is, it's not, there's no individual solution here.
Right. The way I've sometimes spoken about it is that bees thrive in hives, wolves thrive in packs, humans thrive in tribes or tribe-like communities, and we don't thrive without it.
Exactly. And of course, as a medical person, I've been very interested in the neuroscience and the psychobiology of compassion, positive, relationships. It's the fact that we are social animals is built into our nature, and that's not a bad thing. That's potentially a saving grace. And so over the years, in the past, I must say, in terms of the climate issue itself, it's been 15 years or so that kind of gets on the radar, and you keep wanting to hold it off into the into the corner because it's such an overwhelming thing. The past 5 years, 6 years, I've embraced the tragedy that we are in the midst of creating, and I'm just really saddened by, in particular, the political leadership in this country around these issues. It is shameful, and history will not look kindly on this episode. But I'm committed to, it's not like the climate crisis is the center of my being or my world, but let's put it this way. I see it as there's a field of sadness and grief that we're all immersed in, whether you're conscious of it or not. It expresses itself as stress or dysfunctional stress regulation, in our lives, and as a traumatic kind of process. Let's say, as a psychiatrist and somebody interested in mental health, I can tell you that we need to find healthy ways to embrace this kind of collective loss.
Yes, amen.
And that's really, give you an example, the themes from the winter gathering this year is embracing love and joy in chaotic times. It's pretty clear why that might be a relevant issue. The summer gathering.
Very similar to the subtitle of my sermon from last week, I think, which was Post-Doom Inspiration, Finding Joy in Contracting Times, or something like that.
Yeah, it's a paraphrase of the same idea. Well, again, these are zeitgeisty, this is what's up. And the summer gathering this year is Navigating the Tides of Change. Borrowed a title from an old friend of mine, David LaChapelle, who wrote a book called Navigating the Tides of Change. But you get the image that there's a level of uncertainty and chaos as a process that, it turns out creativity requires this. So you can see this is a very pregnant creative moment in human history. But it's usually accompanied by breakdown and breakthrough prior to the emergence of something surprisingly beautiful and new.
Yes.
So a lot of my work, just like with the Story Dome and the Universe Story, focuses on how do you inspire through awe and wonder the joy of living and the recognition that it's a blessing just to be alive.
Yes, exactly.
And to take that as that vocation of bringing your great passion to the world's great need. I mean, that's what, exactly, where they intersect.
Yeah.
So that's what my life has been about for the last, I'm 72, the last 72 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so grateful that you shared it that way, because you're 11 years older than me, and I have viewed you and related to you literally since the late 1980s. Back when I was still in Massachusetts, I became aware of you, although I don't think we met back then, but I've seen you as an older brother on the path since that time. And I'm not aware of any significant divergence. It seems to me that we share what I consider to be the most important priorities, commitments, values, vision, and a heart sensibility in terms of what's needed for our times. And so
there's a remarkable resonance between our work, and I consider you a kindred spirit, a real soul brother.
Yeah,
and
that language works for me too.
Well, it helps to have spirits along the path who are cheering you on. I've been cheering you on, you've been cheering me on, and of course lots of other people too, but
yeah,
it's a beautiful thing. It makes it the better party.
Yeah.
We do have fun when we get together, Michael.
It is true. It is true. Yes, exactly. Rick, one of the things that you touched on briefly before, but I'd love to have you go more deeply into it. I typically ask questions related to human nature, the big picture, we've touched on that already, and also impermanence and death. And so anything you want to say about either human nature or sort of impermanence and death, and then, you know, you can say it, go back to the other.
Yeah.
I want you to go into both.
Well, let's start with impermanence and death, because I think that's one of the big stumbling blocks in our culture, is the denial of death. And, you know, Ernest Becker wrote the book many years ago that defined this issue of the culture of violence that emerges when you deny the role that death plays in the life cycle. Having worked as a physician with life-threatening illness and seen lots of patients die and kind of midwife that process with people, I find there are real parallels between individual mortality and the life cycle of the individual human and the life cycle of societies and cultures. And, well, again, because I believe in the living universe, this is true at all levels. It's scalable. It's a fractal process of birth, development, degeneration, and death. So in my work with patients over 20 years, I really, I don't want to say I got comfortable with death, but recognizing the integrated form of life and death, and the fact that it's not something to be resisted or denied or feared, but accepted as a part of the cycle.
Yes, exactly.
And, you know, when you work with the universe story, it really starts to, you know, you start to see the fractal nature of life cycles and life and death cycles. I became, through my own subjective, you know, near-death experiences in my own ego-death experiences, quite comfortable with both being with people who were dying, but also having the conversation in a way that became life-affirming. Now, there's a little paradox there where you're facing death. You might be physically dying, but the capacity to experience great joy and great love is readily available depending on the way you approach these things. And
yes.
So I've really continued to embrace in my work in terms of culture and community, the positivity that goes along with recognizing no matter what the situation, how then shall we live implies that you have a choice to live joyfully and in a field of love until the moment of passing. I don't claim to have any great insight in terms of the mystery of what happens after you die, but I jokingly like to say that there doesn't seem to be a cosmic drain in the universe. It's not like you get flushed down the toilet here. There's some kind of transmutation taking place, you know. It's, you know, I think it's a healthy way to look at these things.
Yes, yes, exactly.
What I have found in terms of the other part of this question is that inspiring awe and wonder, and for me that's usually through either the arts or nature, immersive experiences in nature. In particular, nature is really my church.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And is one of the quickest ways to get people into a positive space around whatever place they are in the life cycle. So I know you've said this many times in your own work. You know, death is not the enemy here. You know, it's really an opportunity to live fully if you can embrace the entire cycle of life and death. And I'm 72 years old now, so in the autumn of my life, I get to practice these things with friends and family all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read a recent quote by a poet named Edwin Arlington Robinson: "Life is the game that must be played."
Yeah.
And I really like that. Life is the game that must be played. And it can be played with different attitudes. And I really feel that if we tune into our essential nature as humans, that the survival of the fittest is not really what we're about. We're about the survival of the kindest. Yeah. And I think the time we're living in is a moment where we're going to get to practice this on a daily basis. Yes. It's like the Dalai Lama says, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible.
Anything you want to say about human nature?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that we have a violent nature, or there's part of us that is very competitive, and survival of the fittest under times of resource restriction, is obviously what happens. But the better angels of our nature speak to survival of the kindest, because as social animals, we can't survive. Our babies are born completely helpless and have to be taken care of for 7 years or so in order just to survive. So all of a sudden, mutualism, the ability to take care of each other, becomes central to our way of being. And I do think, this is where Bucky Fuller used to emphasize, the world can be made to work for all. We have to change our minds. You have to shift, to a more inclusive notion of what it means to be a part of a living, loving community. Mm-hmm. And I keep going back to the neuroscience and the biology. The fact is that when you look at how we're put together biologically, we are creatures who are social pack animals by nature. And we should really strengthen our capacity. I jokingly, like Star Trek says, relationships, the final frontier. Yeah. We as humans have to learn how to relate in loving and kind and compassionate ways all the time, as opposed to, when we're feeling most open and most vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's challenging when we're living in nested systems, including political, governmental, economic systems that don't facilitate that very well.
No, as a matter of fact, we live in fear-based systems that are designed to keep people feeling insecure, because power can be held over if people are in a state of terror. And it's not who we are in the deepest spiritual sense. And we should not lose sight of that.
Yeah, amen. Well, Rick, the last two questions that I invite you to address, if you want to, one relating to gifts, the way that I have it written here, in coming to terms with the cascading problems of overshoot, resource depletion, climate breakdown, etc. Have you encountered stages of grieving that went beyond mere acceptance? What opened up for you positively on the other side?
Yeah, beyond acceptance for me is joy. And it is the joy of being fully alive. Just expressing it as gratitude for being alive is the start, because even if you're dying, the fact is you're still alive, or you're still in the process, and it's a gift. It's a great gift to be alive. Now, since you have that opportunity to do something, that's the other thing. It's like action is where it's at this point, not thinking about or talking about, but actually doing something loving, being of service to the whole in any way, shape, or form one is capable of doing. That is a part of grieving, in the sense that, you have a locus of control inside yourself that you can direct your attention and your action in ways that are loving or ways that are unloving. You have choices.
Yes.
So for me, I really see myself as developing playful, joyous ways to engage in life in the face of loss, in the face of death. Works for me, and it seems to work for others as well. So as a child of the 60s and somebody who's been involved in the consciousness movement for many years, think of all the different ways we have, whether it's breathing, visualization, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, I tell people, like Joseph Campbell used to say, follow your bliss, look for what you're attracted to, see where the energy is, follow the intuition, and you'll get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
It's not a prescription. It's more an invitation.
Yes, exactly.
To be fully alive, and for each individual, that's a completely, unique thing. Thank God.
Yes, amen. Wow. Well, this is absolutely fabulous. Last question just has to do with what's your sense of what's beyond our control, where and where we still can make a difference. In other words, what's your sense of what's no longer possible, but what still is possible?
Well, I think, you look at the science, you look at the evidence, you realize we are not going to be able to back out of the climate crisis, that it's upon us and it's going to play itself out. The question is, at what level is it going to play itself out? And, once you get up over 2 degrees centigrade, we're looking at catastrophic events that not our generation, but our future generations are going to be dealing with. They're going to look back at us and say, what were we thinking? So on that level, ecologically, catastrophe is upon us. What we do seem to have some real influence over is how we behave in this moment, in our current situation, both toward our fellow humans and toward ourselves. I really feel there's a lot that we can do. And again, you can tell I'm kind of focused on the mind and the heart. The development of spiritual. I hate to say this, but I really think the entire world is going to experience what it's like to have a spiritual practice that involves all of life.
Yes,
it's a good thing. The other thing I want to say is that we don't really know what's going to happen with any certainty. One of the beautiful thing about emergent phenomena is that it's always a surprise. I always use the example of the invention of chlorophyll and going from anaerobic life to aerobic life on this planet. It was bad news for the bacteria when that happened, but big surprise, look what's manifested as a result of the invention of chlorophyll. Well, I think Mother Nature has some secrets that haven't been told yet, and so I'm always looking for the surprises and the pleasant ones rather than the unpleasant ones. I think we're in for some surprises along the way.
For more information about this project, go to postdoom.com.